Hello, today's Bible study comes from 1 Timothy, the second chapter, and we will be continuing with verses 13 through 15, which in the chapter, and they read as follows. For Adam was formed first, then Eve. And Adam was not the one deceived. It was the woman who was deceived and became a sinner. But women will be saved through childbearing if they continue in faith, love, and holiness with propriety. Well, Paul was speaking in these orders of how things are. He was already in the church speaking on order. He's telling them now, Adam was formed first. And he bases that on the reason that the male has authority in the church. But he goes on and continues. He says, man was here first, and that is who had the original authority on earth. That's who it was given to. And you know, y'all read it. You can see it back in Genesis, the early chapters. But the first command was given to man. So God gave this command and authority at the time to Adam. And Paul brings that to the forefront. And then Eve received the command from man. And Paul brings us up to speak on what he had been speaking on in verses 11 through 12. And that was the order. And he says in this, Adam wasn't deceived. He says the woman was deceiving. He says here's another reason. Here's another backup to what he said. He says there was a difference here. Adam was not deceived, but the woman had been deceived. See, they both had sinned. Don't get it wrong. Both Adam and Eve had sinned. But Eve was deceived by the creature, by the serpent. Adam was not deceived, he says. Or at least he wasn't deceived by the serpent. The serpent approached Eve. And Adam did sin, and he knew what he did. He knew what was going on when Eve gave it to him. But the problem here is that Adam had a worse sin. But Eve was more easily deceived in this situation. And since she was easily deceived, Paul looks at that and says, so she couldn't be placed in authority because she was more easily deceived. She had been manipulated by the serpent. So in that statement, it speaks to her being more easily manipulated. And Paul is saying Adam, the woman, when he speaks, the situation here. And he's speaking on gender. Because he says Adam was not deceived, but the woman being deceived. He addresses gender there. And they fell into transgression. And Paul says the situation. Here he goes, has some things with it. Because since she was the one that was deceived, Paul says, nevertheless, she will be saved in childbearing if they continue in faith, love, and holiness with self-control. And it speaks to a woman's character, but this wasn't a hard thing for a woman to do. It is not something that we should all find hard to do. It is truly what we don't understand or we don't look at. It is really a promise. How do you get saved in childbearing? He says, nevertheless, even with that problem, even with the authority, even with being misled, women will be saved in childbearing if, and this is the promise part, because the first part he tells them about the promise, but now he completes the promise part. If they continue in faith, love, and holiness with self-control. And Paul lets them know this. She will be saved. And when Paul says this, he says, hey, I know that Eve was deceived. And he puts it on a general as the women were deceived. And he knows that it all started with Eve being deceived and listening to the serpent. But the Messiah can still save them. And understand, if a man has the wrong idea, we are all brought into this world by a woman, except for Adam. Uh-oh. So, if God can save what comes from a woman, then know that God can save the vessel that is the woman. So, Paul brings us up that just say, even though something had happened, you can still be saved. And you can be used by God. So, Paul isn't knocking the women out. And don't think that he is trying to knock women out. He's telling the truth here. He's given a promise. And he says, faith, love, and holiness with self-control. Look at these things that Paul says here. Faith, we got to have it. Love, that's how we're known. Holiness, we're supposed to walk like that. Self-control, we are to be self-controlled. We are to stay in control. Our emotions, our hatred and angers, and those things should not take over us. We should be led by the Spirit in holiness and control with faith in God and complete love for Him and our brothers and sisters. And if you don't realize this, all this belongs to the Lord because they are His qualities. Amen.